Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. One of the big conversations that's going on in the province of Alberta right now is centered around the education system. There are some Let's Go With groups who are trying to make the state of the education system, the state of classrooms, an increasingly raised issue, particularly as we go into the municipal elections, because with the municipal elections come the school board elections. Now, there's people on both sides of the issue. There's folks like Back Alberta and David Parker who are pushing some incredibly socially regressive views of how the classroom should be run, the types of things that should be taught in the classroom. And then there's some other groups. We're very excited to welcome to the show today the executive director of one of those groups. Medeana Moussa is the executive director of Support Our Students. Medeana, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having us.
So before we get into the dumpster fire, who is, if we could talk a little bit about who is Medeana, who is Support Our Students. We'll do the who is Medeana first. Who is Medeana Moussa?
Well, I'm currently the executive director of Support Our Students. I'm a mom of 4 kids. I'm a recovering entrepreneur and previous communications professional. I got really activated by what I saw transpiring in Alberta over the last 4 or 5 years, particularly in our education sector. And I found myself reaching out to different organizations to solve some of these problems. And that is how I came to be introduced to Support Our Students Alberta.
I got to ask, what was it that activated you? Was it the high quality evidence-based curriculum that was rolled out a couple of years ago?
No, it was before that. You know, I found that people in my local community public school seemed to be leaving come grade 4. Students were leaving our community for other schools. And at first I had this very natural attack of like, grass must be greener. What is happening at these other schools? And they were going for charter schools and private schools, and some people weren't even starting at our public school. And I had found the experience to be excellent. And I just, it confused me. And so I went on a researching mission, and I found that it was really just boiled down to marketing. And I saw that our public schools were being eroded because of policies in government of government monies, public monies following the student to privately managed schools. And this was creating a huge problem for our community school, and it was going to impact the health of our school, because when you lose population in your school, you lose dollars. And so I just saw this as such a crisis when you look at that happening all over our province and what that will do in the long term to our public education system. I remember when charter schools were introduced back in the 90s as a student myself, and even then I thought it was quite questionable. And now that we see what has happened over the last 30 years with charter school policy in place, and more public money following students to private schools, it really, really underlined the urgency to protect public education in Alberta. So that was my call to action.
How did you, I mean, there's lots of different organizations that somebody could get involved in. What drew you to Support Our Students? And as a secondary question to that, what is Support Our Students?
Well, probably, 2 things drew me to Support Our Students. I liked that it was student-centered. So the work is focused on improving education specifically for students, and that it's nonpartisan. So that was probably the biggest hook for me. And also their one championing rally cry is public money should stay in public schools. So that is something I believe firmly in. And the founders of Support Our Students were very dedicated and charismatic and very well spoken. And so I think that just really resonated with me. They were legitimate. They had done excellent work and were legitimate within the sphere of education. They'd proven themselves.
So I just want to be absolutely clear for our audience. When you say Support Our Students is nonpartisan, you're not funded by the NDP. Conversely, you're also not funded by the UCP. You're a standalone organization without any ties to any political parties. Is that a safe statement?
Yes, that's correct. That's accurate.
Okay. So let's sort of get into the elephant in the room. I'm sure the conversation is going to branch out to some other places as well. But historically, school board elections have been some of the most, oh, that's happening, sort of things that we have in our democratic process in Alberta. 9 times out of 10 when people go into the ballot box, that's a made-up statistic, by the way, but 9 times out of 10 when people go into the ballot box, they look at the thing and they go, oh, I'm voting for this person for mayor, and oh, I'm voting for this person for city councilor or municipal councilor, and then they go, oh, wait, oh, what's this category? I think I might have seen that name. They sound nice. I'll check that box. Historically, school board elections have not been the focus of the voting that happens at that time period, but we're seeing an increased emphasis on the school board elections. A lot of that's coming from the fact that there is an organization called Take Back Alberta that has said that they're coming for the school boards. So, I mean, here's my first question to start with. When you hear about any political organization, so we're not just talking about Take Back Alberta, we'll get into them in a sec, but when you hear about any political organization saying, hey, you know what, we've got this set of political beliefs, we believe that our political beliefs are right, so we're going to take over the education boards, what's your immediate reaction to that?
Well, you know, I'm a little bit cynical about it, to be honest, because I just find it's gross. That's my initial reaction because it's the politicizing of something that is so important for our communities, for our future, for children. It's kind of it's sneaky. It's very Slytherin-like um, of that organization. It's very opportunistic because it has been sort of an underutilized level of government to date. Um, but it's mostly very, very concerning because I sometimes think it's areas like this, like trustees, this level of government, that it makes it hard to do really good work, but it's actually quite easy to be destructive. And I am quite concerned that an organization like this will be able to organize just well enough and fly under the radar and end up having control over our schools to do a lot of damage. And they really can't sustain a lot of damage at this point with consistent underfunding by governments over the last several years, decades. I don't know how many blows they can handle. And this really would be putting some very dangerous people in a position of power. And it's it's where people like our current premier got their political start, right? So it's not like trusteeship is maybe the last stop for some of these people. It is the beginning of launching a political career.
Do you have, I mean, one of the things that the Take Back Alberta crew uh, is very good at, I'll say, is, Take Back Alberta came out of the COVID pandemic. It came as a response to health measures being put in place. And a lot of the folks that are involved, not all, but a lot, of the folks that are involved with Take Back Alberta have gone down a lot of the different rabbit holes of conspiracy theories. So we hear repeatedly David Parker talks about things like, oh, it's the drag shows that are happening in the public schools. I'm not aware of any drag shows in public schools. Maybe I'm reading the wrong newspapers. Perhaps I should be subscribing to the Epoch Times. I don't know. But do you think that there's a real risk that because we're talking about people who are so polarized, who are so misinformed, that they're going to go into potentially these roles if they get in, and the business of running a school board is going to become secondary to the business of advancing a social and political agenda?
I think the people that Take Back Alberta seem to be targeting to run for school boards, and who they're targeting for messages clearly aren't well informed of the challenges that our public schools and our education system are facing, because they are, for all intents and purposes, focusing on things that are pretend, that are not actually transpiring in our schools. I'd like to know when the last time this David Parker character stepped foot into a public school. It's my understanding that he was homeschooled. So, what is his obsession with deciding to dictate to the rest of the public what our children should learn? Because clearly, there was this implication that sex education was going beyond science. Well, that's false. The curriculum is completely available for any parent to see. These accusations that things are happening behind classroom doors that we don't know about is an intent to spread moral panic amongst parents, and it's completely unfounded. These are accusations. This is like spreading falsehoods. So, the types of people who are going to grab onto this and be motivated by it are certainly not the same person who is critically analyzing how to best manage a school and ensure that resources are spent in the most responsible way that is focused on good education for the student. And that is quite concerning.
You kind of opened a window there. I'm going to see if I can jump through it. What would you say are, I mean, I have kids in the public school system. Even if there was the option for them to have exposure to a drag story time thing, it's not happening in schools. It's happening in public libraries. Parents have the choice as to whether or not they want to take their kids to those events. So to me, it's a giant nothing burger. But there's all of these imaginary fear-mongery challenges that David Parker and Take Back Alberta are trying to throw up into the ether. What are the real challenges? Like, give me your top three. And I'm going to talk for a second to give you a chance to organize them. But give me your top three challenges that you see the education system, the public education system facing over the next 5-10 years. What are the three biggest things that you think school boards should be focused on?
Number one, class sizes. They are too large. The only way to attend to this is to hire teachers and increase resources. Number two, the shortage of teachers is a challenge. Hiring enough teachers to match growth is a demographic challenge. We need to be educating more teachers to ensure that they can meet the demands of our growth, of our population growth. And we need appropriate supports, because the complexities within classrooms continue to increase, and children need access to mental health supports. They need speech pathologists. They need access to occupational therapists. Educational assistants are wonderful. We need more of them, but all of those resources are support resources, and they do not make up for classrooms of 40. So we need to ensure that our classrooms are manageable in order to meet all of these increased needs of our students.
I want to talk about the class sizes bit, because there's some things, I mean, it's fascinating that you just listed off three issues that keep coming up by anybody who seems to know anything about education, and yet they're three issues that we haven't seen the Take Back Alberta crew talk about. Gosh, it's almost as if the priorities are completely out of sync or something. But let's talk about the class sizes for a bit, because this has been an ongoing issue in Alberta, and it seems like there's some people who are saying we don't even know with any accuracy how big the class size problem is across Alberta. Can you talk a little bit about that for a sec?
Yeah, certainly. And those people are actually right. We don't know how big our class sizes are in Alberta because back in 2019, the UCP government removed the requirement for school boards to report class sizes to the public. And they are no longer required to ensure that families and constituents rather, understand how large these class sizes are and where the funding is being invested in a very transparent way. So we've asked for school boards to report that because it's really an ethical issue. They are still tracking that information. And parents on school playgrounds know how big their class sizes are, right? But it's just that we do not have access to a full picture. And this is with intent. So if you're not counting it, how can you really track the problem and then fix it? So we support our students perceives this as complete political strategy to try to ignore this problem and allow it to fester without taking accountability for it.
Well, it's not like there's any kind of a pattern of behavior with the current government of, hey, if we don't report the numbers, maybe the problem will just magically go away.
Or just people won't care, right? People won't notice it. Yeah, it is. Yeah, we've seen this before, right? This isn't like a new strategy by this government.
But what we have seen is there have been plenty of media reports where every once in a while there's a picture that gets leaked out from a high school or a junior high school where kids are holding classes or classes are being held for kids is probably a better way to say that, in hallways, in cafeterias, in public spaces inside of schools because there's simply no space inside of those schools. We've certainly heard from other folks on the show before that is a, let's go with detrimental learning environment. How big of a priority do you think class sizes should be in the upcoming elections for school board trustees? And secondary to that, how much influence do school board trustees actually have over influencing class sizes?
I think class sizes should be the number one issue. The other issue that I think trustees need to champion are maintenance of our schools. So, because those two things go hand in hand, and I'm going to just jump into the weeds and I won't torture listeners for too long on this, but it actually goes back to a policy that school boards have to adhere to get maintenance funding. And it's all about utilization rates. And the government requires schools to have 85% of utilization rate. So that's based on your school population in order to get your maintenance funding. And so there's not that many schools that actually reach that 80. There are. If you're bursting at the seams, you reach the 85%. But like, for instance, my kid's school, I think for us to be at 85%, we need 685 students in our elementary school. There's almost 500. And the fire capacity of our gym is only 400. So these are like really arbitrary utilization rates that are used to help manage how little funding that schools get to maintain their buildings. So of course, school boards, they get the whole lump sum, and then they distribute it and make sure that schools are, well enough maintained. But they're being squeezed. So I'd really like to see trustees, what their job is. Their influence is tempered. They could be doing a better job, for sure, of making sure that these issues are transparent to voters. They could very easily be making sure that the number of children in each class size and the teacher to children ratios are public, and they're choosing to not do that. I think that's a real failing on those school boards. But they're also reacting to a government that was completely toxic to them. The former Minister of Education threatened them with her big hammer. And I think they took that threat to heart, and they have not really risen to the challenge to advocate for students in the most effective way possible, because they're so worried about more funding being taken away, and that students are going to bear the brunt of that, of basically that they're going to be at fault for damaging students' education. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, it did. I want to talk about that big hammer for a sec, though, because I think there's some people who may not realize let's go with vulnerabilities of a school board and a school board trustee's position. What's the big hammer? We'll do a little bit of a history review. What's the big hammer that you're talking about that school boards, I don't know, particularly the Calgary School Board maybe, could have been threatened with by the former education minister? I always get her name confused because I think of the Harry Potter character, Adriana Lagrange. What was the big hammer?
Basically, that all the trustees would have been fired, and they could also eliminate that role. So the Minister of Education could also eliminate school boards entirely and take away sort of that democratic representation that schools have always had, and I think is an important layer of government to ensure that schools really are responding to needs within their local communities. But that actually brings us back full circle a little bit to your comment at the beginning about sort of the apathy that we've seen around voters participating in their school board election. Back in the 90s, school boards and trustees had a lot of responsibilities taken away from them, one of which was specifically raising taxes. And I think when that happened, that is how the beginning of apathy started to really weigh in, because less and less of the decisions for our schools seem to be at the responsibility of trustees, and more power was centralized with the Minister of Education. So, and that's how the Minister of Education came to have a big hammer, which, interestingly enough, was used on somebody who started their career out in politics. Our very own current Premier Danielle Smith, was a former public school trustee for Calgary, and was her term was cut short by the Minister of Education at that time.
And I think it's important to note a little bit of the history as to why the Minister of Education stepped in. It wasn't because of ideological reasons. It wasn't because the Minister of Education wanted to take control of the school board and have everything their way. It was because that particular school board, by some accounts, because of Danielle Smith, had become so toxic that it was inoperable. And so it wasn't able to fulfill the roles. And I think that there probably is an argument to be made that when you have an order of government that is so consumed with its own, I don't know, bullshit, that it's not able to fulfill its obligations to the public, there should be a mechanism for somebody to step in and say, hey, you did get elected to do this job, right? But we have seen Adriana Lagrange did earlier on make the threat, I'll fire y'all if you don't do exactly what I tell you. And the new Minister of Education, if we go back to the situation with Athabasca University, he's also made it very, very clear that he doesn't seem to have any compunctions in regards to saying, hey, if you don't do exactly what I'll tell you, we'll get rid of you. How do school boards, are you aware of any mechanism that school boards have to say, how about you don't do that, Minister of Education?
Well, so they can't just do it without any any burden of proof of wrongdoing. And I think actually this is a really important time to highlight that the government put the CBE under a microscope and huge scrutiny, financial scrutiny, and they had to go through an audit, which took a lot of time and effort. And that audit actually came out exonerating the board and saying they are running a very tight ship. There's not any extra dollars or waste. So, the Minister of Education at the time, Minister LaGrange, she fell short of providing a burden of proof there and was not able to do what I think she wanted to, which was disband the board. And so I think I'm not really aware of what other mechanisms other than that defense and going through the work that the board can do. However, when it comes to public relations and making sure that they are informing the public of what's happening within school boards, I think that is a very underutilized tool by our current school boards. And I think they could also work more effectively together. There's an organization called the Public School Boards of Alberta, the Public Association of School Boards of Alberta, and they represent Edmonton Public School Board, a lot of other smaller center school boards and rural school boards. Calgary has not joined. I think it would send a big message of solidarity if public school boards worked collectively on some of these massive issues and together reported their school sizes and were able to leverage this information to bear light on what's happening with funding of some of our schools. But that's another interesting point about we have these organizations that actually do have clout and do have access to government. And if there were enough Take Back Alberta board members, trustees elected, they could end up actually taking over some of these other organizations. So this is a really dangerous proposition that Take Back Alberta has made.
I want to talk about one other thing, and then I want to get a little bit more into the Take Back Alberta and some of the issues that are being raised very, very clearly to polarize and divide the electorate in going into the next round of elections. Your second thing that you listed off as the biggest, one of the biggest issues that's facing the education system right now is a teacher shortage. While we're having, and it, that obviously ties right back into the first one that you listed off, which is class sizes, because if you don't have enough teachers, then your class sizes are going to be bigger. One of the things that we've seen over the last couple of years, and certainly we're seeing amplified with Mr. Parker's rhetoric, is there's an animosity that's being projected towards teachers. They're trying to do all of these things to your kids and all of that sort of rhetoric. It would seem to me, I'm no expert, that when you make teachers the targets and when you try to suggest that teachers are trying to teach all of this stuff that they're not, by the way, to students, and that they're trying to subvert the relationship between parents and their kids, that doesn't make it the most appealing career for folks to go into. Like, hey, I want to go work in a job where I'm going to get crapped on by crazy people 7 days a week. What do you think needs to be addressed with that?
This is actually a little bit, it overlaps a little bit with healthcare, of course, as well, that we've seen through the pandemic, right? Healthcare workers and healthcare shortages being treated terribly and being somewhat demonized by the government. So, the government has actually very much targeted teachers and waged an attack on teachers, especially the Kenney government in the last 4 years. And of course, it's damaging. There's a lack of respect there. Teachers are always on their heels, kind of waiting for the next barrage. And that it's very damaging. And I hope that communities and parents who are in schools recognize that teachers They see them as humans. Like this is like a rhetoric by the government to try to point fingers and blame and really dehumanize a group of people who happen to be our friends, our neighbors, the people that we trust our kids to for 6.5 hours, the best part of their day are spent with our children. And I hope when they hear about these negative stories that are being used for political purposes, that they strip it away and remember who helped their kids through this education journey. And my personal experience, from an anecdotal perspective, is I feel very much like I'm a partner with my teachers' kids, and we collaborate, and they have such important professional insights into how these children are learning and what they're not learning and how to support them. And they're incredibly capable of being able to omit this noise and stay so professional and engaged on their job, that I just have the utmost respect for the teachers that I've had the privilege to have my children taught by.
There is a movement that's going on. It seems to be floating up, bubbling up. I'm not sure what the term is, but when you get like milk and it goes bad and you get that layer that kind of floats to the top and it's the grossest stuff. It seems like some of that is bubbling up from the States in regards to the conversation around education, because we have seen provincial governments putting forward new rules that seem to be in many ways attacking the education system, in many ways attacking teachers. We've seen recently the whole debate over pronouns. Now, to me, this is the dumbest conversation that we could possibly be having when it comes to the education system, particularly given the things that you've highlighted as concerns that exist within the education system. But I want to get your reaction on it. We have premiers, and Lord knows, given the people who are involved in the provincial government currently, it's just a matter of time before Alberta decides to wade into this dumpster fire as well. But it seems like there's an agitator group that's saying, hey, you know what, teachers, they're trying to keep secrets from you. They don't want you to know about your kids if your kids are going through things. And I always go back to the basic argument of, hey, you know what, if your kid is going through a thing, I don't care what the thing is. Let's say that they have some questions about gender identity or something like that. If that's a thing that they're going through and they're not comfortable talking to you, that has nothing to do with the teachers and everything to do with your relationship as a parent to your kid. And it seems like to me, rather than saying to parents, hey, maybe try having a better relationship with your kids, there are people who are trying to use this issue to divide that partnership that you just described between teachers and parents. Am I missing something wrong there? Because it seems to me, we have things like Child Protective Services, and part of the conversation that we don't seem to be having is sometimes there's just crap parents. And sometimes kids need to have supports because they don't have that relationship with their parents. And if they don't have that relationship, they're at much higher risk of all kinds of negative outcomes. Am I getting this all wrong?
Well, I think what you're kind of describing too is like children are, it takes a village, right? And this parental rights movement is about becoming more insular and removing the village, or at least the village that doesn't match the bar of ideology, but that they believe in. But it's also, when we're talking about parental rights, what we're not talking about are children's rights. And Parents Support Our Students Alberta, we talk about children's rights. And they are not the property of parents. They are the responsibility of parents. And I think what we're seeing is a political group, a group of somewhat bad actors trying to make this into a wedge issue and to raise the alarm bells for parents and the panic, um, and to advance their political aspirations. And they've seen it work in Florida. And they're trying to copycat that here. And we've seen education reformers for the last 30 plus years try to use this playbook over and over again. And there's untruths that are spreading amongst the internet that people are grabbing onto and thinking that it's true. And I'm also curious to know how many of these people actually went to public schools, actually have children in public schools, and are even parents that are championing this issue. It's really disturbing, because what we're starting to talk about here are human rights, and whether these children's human rights are going to be protected within our schools. And we've been working so hard to try to create safe environments. And also just the irony that these guys talk about choice and freedom, but what they're actually doing with this proposed approach to our schools is about control and lack of freedom. And I believe that we really have to pay attention to this and stand up for this. This is a human rights issue. And I don't think sort of the silent majority can just sit back and let this loud group speak for us. I think it's time to push back, and to push back pretty meaningfully.
You just handed me the windows, so I'm gonna keep climbing through them. We're talking about the silent majority now, and we're talking about the fact that there are, like, we opened up the conversation talking about the fact that there are a lot of people who are relatively disaffected by the reality that there are school board elections, there are school board trustees. A lot of people just don't pay attention to it. But we have now David Parker, who has, there's, Lord knows there's no shortage of things to either criticize or make jokes about. I was this close to wearing a turtleneck today. But he is an incredibly effective political organizer. We're talking about a man who has been able to take over half of the UCP board, who's positioned by many accounts to take over the other half in just a few short weeks here. We're talking about somebody whose organization claims to be responsible for moving Jason Kenney from leadership, and who claims to have done the lion's share of work of installing Danielle Smith as leader of the UCP. So as much as you can, it's very easy to look at David Parker and make turtleneck jokes, and it is so easy to do that. The reality is he has demonstrated an ability to get things done. He also has this very socially regressive agenda, where he's talking about, you talked about the Florida model there, and he's using a lot of the same rhetoric. He's using a lot of the divisive language of us versus them. We've got to take it back from them, all of that sort of thing. We have this silent majority, and we have this disaffection that exists with the general population in regards to school board elections. How do you think the province of Alberta goes from, oh yeah, I guess we're having those school board elections too, I'll pick an alphabetical order this time around. How do we go from there to getting people actually interested and involved, do you think, in the upcoming elections for school boards that are very likely, because of the stakes that are involved, going to be some of the most important in the history of the province?
Well, the left actually has to collaborate and coordinate an effort, and recognize that we can't just, like, it's very easy to say, like, this is ridiculous. I think we've even said that this seems so ridiculous to be fighting over what's happening in classrooms when what they're saying is false. So you kind of don't want to give these lies oxygen, but they're being made by people who have like you just said, who have actually organized, who have wielded power, who have proven influence. So they actually have to be taken seriously. And I think people need to be, educated and made aware that it's happening. And also that this is a Trojan horse of sorts, right? This parental rights movement is 100% not about making our schools better. This is about, for the most part in the US, particularly, the religious right taking back control of our education system. And this is an attack on our secular institutions. And I think we have to make people aware that this isn't just lighting our hair on fire in worry. This is actually a legitimate threat. And we've been seeing micro step after micro step after micro step. And so it sort of goes unnoticed. But when you look at the culmination of that and how it's built and in its whole picture, it becomes a very real threat. So I think we are going to have to get as organized and informing our parent population and our schools. And actually that brings up another issue. We need more than just parents to be engaged in education, right? We as a society all hold a stake in the way that children are educated in our communities in order to build a harmonious society. And this effort by Take Back Alberta and parents' choice groups that are championing parents' rights over children's rights is really an attack on that harmonious way of life that I think is what the majority of Albertans and Canadians have strived for. We're imperfect, but it's something we're striving for. And this undermines all of it.
Do you think that there's part of the conversation, and it's going to get a little spicy here, so if you want to take a pass on this one, I'll totally understand it. But one of the things that David Parker has tried to do is distance himself from the fact that this is very clearly for him motivated from a place of religion. He said that Take Back Alberta isn't a religious group, and yet they open their meetings with prayers. He said that he's not coming from a religious bent, but all one has to do is go through his social media to find no shortage of religious references and Bible verses to back up his positions. So it's not that he's saying, I believe that we shouldn't be using pronouns in schools because of, and then insert evidence. It's because I believe we shouldn't be using schools and pronouns because heathens. So it's not, there is a far right, and I want to be clear, I'm not dunking on Christians in general or any religious group in general, but when we start to talk about extreme religious groups, I think that we have to be able to have a conversation about that. One of the things that David Parker has done a very good job of is aligning himself with other members of other religious groups. We saw this in Calgary with the Leave Our Kids Alone and the protests that were billed as Muslim organized protests against the Justin Trudeau's woke curriculum. Justin Trudeau didn't write the curriculum. I mean, there's all kinds of things to be pissed at Justin Trudeau about, but now we're just talking about fairy tales. Do you think that some of those other religious segments of our population, of the fabric of Canada, need to be aware of the fact that as much as David Parker's like, no, it's not religious, for him, it very much appears to be. And as much as he'll work with people who he can get on side for the moment, if he has to choose, or if he gets to choose, between putting forward curriculum and content that is Judeo-Christian or Sikh or Muslim or he's going to go with the Judeo-Christian worldview all day, every day. Do you think that people need to be aware that this is a guy who will potentially play them when it's convenient and dump them when they're not?
Well, yes, obviously. I mean, and he's not the only one doing it. We're actually seeing the leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, go after that group of minorities as well. So this is very much like a marriage of convenience for the moment to wield power and to use your vote. Um, to it's very manipulative. It's not honest, and I think, I'm a firm believer in religious freedom. I will protect it. I would fight for that, and just in the same way that I would do the same for any human rights, right? We those are fundamental, and it's it's really upsetting to see the politicization creep so far into our schools in this way, and when religious groups transcend from just focusing on their beliefs in their communities and actually want to purport their ideologies within and their theology within our schools and politically become politically active the way that it feels like Take Back Alberta is trying to do, similar to what the Christian right is doing in the United States. That is hugely problematic. And I think a massive overstep for the mindset of most Canadians. I think most Canadians believe that everyone should have the right to their belief, but you should not be trying to put those beliefs forward onto especially children. And that, I mean, our entire public education system is built on being secular, right? If you wanted to go into religious schools or being homeschooled, we actually have that option. And in Alberta, we're crazy enough to even fund it. They don't do that in the US. That's actually why charter schools started in the US, because they wanted funding for their Christian schools, for their religious sect schools, and have these like segregated communities. And so it's really kind of fascinating to me that, homeschooling their kids and having that access to funding isn't enough for Take Back Alberta. They want to make sure that this ideology flows into our classrooms, and it's their beliefs that are being hoisted upon the rest of us. So yeah, I think it's time to organize, everybody. Come on, Alberta.
Well, that brings me to my next question, because one of the things that has been coming up in conversation after conversation is, the Take Back Alberta folks. They are extremely well organized. They had 3 years of pandemic chicanery. I'm not going to use the word that immediately popped into my head there. To build networks, to organize, to learn how to do communications and all of that. And I would argue that there's certainly political opportunists like Mr. Parker, who, as much as he presents himself as being from the grassroots, this guy is a political operative for years and years and years. He goes back to the federal Conservatives. He worked with Jason Kenney. So for him to present himself as like, oh, I'm just one of you, is a little bit disingenuous. But how do people who don't want to see Take Back Alberta take over the school system, how do people organize? What should people do?
Well, I mean, we need to be having these conversations around what is actually important in our communities. People need to be reaching out to their current trustees, finding out where do they land on these issues, reaching out to their current MLAs. I mean, I would like to hear from all of the UCP current MLAs where they stand on this issue. Are they actually going to be following into this in the steps of Saskatchewan, who have, and I think it's New Brunswick as well, who have put in laws that children under the age of 16 will not have right to their own privacy as to whether they want to use pronouns in school or not. This is not something that we were faced with during the election, and now it's it seems to be on the table. So that is what Take Back Alberta is going to be focusing on. It's what another organization about parental rights is going to be focusing on. So I think it's time for us to talk to our networks and let them know that our secular system is being targeted, and in bad faith. They're going to undermine our entire public education system. And so we need to work, cross sectors between education and health. Support Our Students Alberta is a nonpartisan organization, but we will do we will lend our support to people who are fighting for students, and that is going to be our big task, is how to figure out how to do this over the next year and to be prepared.
I mean, you bring up the legislate, and I know I said it earlier, but I just, it drives me nuts, because if your relationship, not your, but like greater your, the royal your, if your relationship with your child is so broken that you require the federal or provincial government to legislate them to communicate with you, like, that statement alone is so messed up. It, to me, it's just, it blows my mind that there are parents who believe, I can't invest the time to have a relationship with my kid. I can't invest the time to build the trust with my kid. My kid, their child. So I'm going to make the government make rules that forces my kid to disclose things to me, because I just can't be bothered to build that relationship. It just blows my mind that that's where people believe we should be at. Um,
Well, and I just find, there's so much irony here, right? Because here's a group of people who've said government has overstepped. Oh, but yet, oh, please, government, overstep in this way to take, the individual rights of my child away so that I can supersede them. This is so much about control and about owning your child, and so much about fear. And, we haven't even talked about the library books, like book banning that's happened in the United States about this, right? This is about, like, my child's going to read about somebody being part of the LGBTQ plus community and therefore will become part of it, right? Like, it is just based in so much nonsense and fear. And what is also really, really concerning me is that this group is targeting a marginalized, at-risk youth population, right? And using them for their political gain. And I think that's how we almost need to be talking about this, because we need to center the rights of these students, center the rights of the children. And the harm that's being done to this group of people is really, really damaging. And it's like asking, the Take Back Alberta group is asking for these people to go into the shadows, to not exist, right? And that's not okay. That is not actually a society that we should be accepting of, and allow them to just, and for the silent majority to not stand up and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is again so much of what we believe in and what we've worked towards as a society, to be tolerant, to be accepting, to be safe. And so I think we need to find what is our line in the sand. My line in the sand happened 5 years ago, but who's with us on this? Like, it is really time to recognize that there's harm being done by people like David Parker, who's trying to present himself in some moderate way when really he's very clearly and ambitiously pursuing a religious right agenda.
I couldn't agree more. Um, if people like there's a much bigger conversation that obviously the province needs to have about how to organize. I love the ideas about getting in contact with current school board trustees, making time with current school board trustees to find out where they sit, where they stand. I think that's something that everybody and anybody could do. If people want to stay in the loop with what Support Our Students is doing, how do they do that? Do you I still can't call it X. Do you Twitter? Like what's Support Our Students up to these days?
Yes, yes, we are active on social media. On Yeah, I know. I missed the little blue bird. I'm not gonna lie. It like went from something so accessible and friendly to something so scary and very Star Wars like. Like it's kind of but yes, we're on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, but we also do send out a newsletter. So sign up for our newsletter at supportourstudentsalberta.ca and get engaged. I mean, we are a citizen action group. We are not just a closed advocacy group. We would love to have more and more involvement. We're pretty fluid. So we would love to hear from Albertans that care about education and care about this fight that I think we have no choice but to join.
I'm going to open up the floor for you. Anything else you want people to hear? Anything else you want people to be looking at, looking for? All yours.
Oh, wow. I wasn't ready for that. I think, the work that Support Our Students has been doing over since its inception has actually very much focused on centering students. And this parental rights movement has always been there. And they have just taken up different issues along the way, trying to garner more and more supporters in order to leverage a political agenda. And that has been ever present in, gay straight alliances in school, in having more and more public funding leave the public system towards private and homeschoolers and charter schools. It has been, and now we're seeing this fight being leveraged against at-risk youth in the LGBTQ plus communities. And so we've seen this over and over and over again. And I think what's different this time is that we have an organization against us that is well organized. And this is distracting parents and educators and the media, again, from some of the very real issues that we need to work on. So I would love to have more focus and more pressure on our MLAs and our school trustees about sharing more and more information. I think the more information that trustees and school boards can share with the public, the less effective some of these obscure arguments about secrecy become, the less effective they are at painting a picture of what our school classrooms look like. So I really encourage our trustees and our school boards and our parents and students to talk about what's actually happening in classrooms, so that people who aren't in classrooms, who are purporting to speak for us, like Take Back Alberta, understand that we actually love our community schools. And there's a lot of us. There's 93% of Albertans that choose public schools. And we do that for a reason. We have other choices, but we're exercising our right and our choice to participate in this secular part of our society, to build a more harmonious community. And I'd like us to talk more about what has made the promise of public education successful to this point, and really work towards bolstering that and then just and keep some of these new threats at bay while we do that.
I think you said it. I think you said it really well there. I think one of the big questions that we have to be willing to ask of ourselves and of each other is, do we want our public system to serve as babysitters, or do we want our public system to make sure that it's helping parents to produce students who are able to operate in society in a healthy and effective way? And that's a team effort. And the notion that any parent, I mean, I'll say it myself here, the notion that I possess the entire skill set required to teach both of my kids everything they need to know about how to be good citizens and how to be healthy and effective in society is ridiculous. I'm not. A lot of people say I'm arrogant, but I'm not that arrogant. And I think that there's the way that you said that is incredibly important. So thank you.
Well, I think what you just said too, like, our democracy depends on this. I think through COVID, I know with 4 children, I certainly learned that I do not have the training that it takes to be an effective educator, right? This is a profession, and they're professionals that do it, and they do actually a wonderful job. And this kind of noise that is, for the most part, based on false claims about what's happening in our classrooms is nothing but, toxic to what has been to date a really, really positive and effective system.
Yeah. And I just want to, I mean, we haven't talked about it much. Teachers are awesome. I mean, there's some crap teachers out there for sure. I had a couple, but for the most part, teachers are some of the most hardworking, amazing people. And the fact that has not been, the fact that we're lucky enough to have people who show up to do that job for not great pay, in not great conditions, sometimes in terrible conditions when we talk about classroom sizes and lack of supports. We are so fortunate to have those people, and we should not, anybody who's trying to crap on them, we should all be lining up to say, oh, no, you don't.
Absolutely. Go out and thank a teacher today. This is a big week for them. It's back to school. They are really grinding it out, for the majority of them, for the right reasons. Of course, there's always exceptions in every profession, law, health, business, what have you. People are human. But I would say that the majority of teachers are pretty special humans. And thank a teacher today.
100%. Medeana Moussa with Support Our Students, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I hope that we'll be able to have more conversations down the road as we get closer to the elections of the new school board trustees, because that's definitely something that we're going to be paying close attention to. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat today.
Thanks so much, Nate. Really enjoyed it.
And that's it for another episode of The Breakdown. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here, we would love nothing more than if you thought about signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month, you can help us continue to produce this kind of content. Whether you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, in which case, maybe leave a review and a rating, or whether you're watching it on one of our streaming platforms, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who is part of the Breakdown's audience. And as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.